I grew up in a house where I was never treated like a daughter. To my parents, I was more like unpaid help who happened to live under the same roof. While my brother relaxed on the couch and my parents watched TV, I was the one cooking dinner, washing dishes, cleaning the floors, and doing laundry. If something wasn't perfect, my mom would sigh and say, "You can't even do this right." My dad would laugh and add, "Well, at least she's useful for something." They always said it like a joke, but after hearing it for years, it stopped feeling like one. Every holiday was the same, especially Christmas. While everyone else opened gifts and took photos, I spent the entire day in the kitchen cooking a huge dinner alone. That year, after 8 exhausting hours of preparing everything, I stepped into the living room for a moment, hoping someone might finally appreciate the effort. Instead, my brother smirked and said, "Look, the maid's taking a break." Everyone laughed. In that moment, something inside me finally snapped. They didn't see me as family. To them, I really was just the maid. So I quietly went back to the kitchen, but this time, not to finish dinner. Because before the night was over, they were about to learn what happens when the maid finally decides to quit. The kitchen felt strangely quiet after that moment. The laughter from the living room continued, but it sounded distant now, like it belonged to another house. I stood there staring at everything I had spent the entire day preparing. The turkey was perfectly roasted, the mashed potatoes were still steaming, and the pies were cooling near the window. 8 hours of work, chopping, stirring, baking, just so everyone else could sit comfortably and enjoy it. For years, I had done the same thing, hoping that maybe one day someone would notice. Maybe my mom would say thank you. Maybe my dad would say he appreciated the help. But after hearing my brother call me the maid, and everyone laughing, something inside me finally stopped trying. Slowly, I opened the cupboard and took out a few containers. At first it felt strange, like I was breaking an unspoken rule. But then I started packing the food. Turkey slices went into one container, mashed potatoes into another, stuffing into a third. One by one, the dishes disappeared from the counter. With every lid I closed, I felt a strange sense of calm growing inside me. From the living room, my dad called out, "Hey, is dinner ready yet?" His voice carried the same impatient tone, as always, like the meal was something he had ordered rather than something someone had worked all day to prepare. I didn't answer. I just kept packing. A few minutes later, my mom walked into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Her eyes scanned the empty counters and the containers in my hands. "What are you doing?" she asked slowly. "Packing," I replied. "Packing what?" "The food." Her expression tightened immediately. "Why would you do that? Dinner is about to be served." I zipped the bag and looked at her calmly. "Because I'm leaving." For a moment, she just stared at me, then let out a small laugh. "Stop being dramatic and put everything back." But before I could answer, my dad walked into the kitchen behind her. He looked around the room, confused by the empty oven and the missing dishes. "Wait, where's the turkey?" he asked. I lifted the bag slightly. "Here." My brother leaned over the doorway and frowned. "You're joking, right?" "No," I said quietly. The room went completely silent. My dad crossed his arms and said firmly, "Put the food back on the table." But for the first time, I didn't feel nervous or pressured. I just felt calm. I picked up my coat from the chair and slung the bag over my shoulder. "You can't take Christmas dinner," my mom snapped. I looked at her for a second before answering. "I bought the groceries. I cooked everything. And according to all of you, I'm just the maid." No one laughed this time. My brother shook his head and muttered, "You're ruining Christmas." I walked toward the door and replied quietly, "No, you did that a long time ago." And as I stepped outside with the food, leaving the kitchen empty behind me, they were finally standing in the house they had created, one where the maid had just quit. The night air was cold when I stepped outside, but for the first time in years it felt refreshing instead of uncomfortable. I walked down the street carrying the bags of food, the smell of Christmas dinner still rising from the containers. For a moment I wondered if I should feel guilty, but the feeling never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in that house for a long time: peace. A few of my friends were having a small Christmas gathering at their apartment, and when I arrived with bags full of food, they stared at me in surprise. "Wait, you made all this?" one of them asked. I nodded and set everything on the table. Soon the room filled with laughter and warm conversation as everyone helped serve the meal. No one ordered me around. No one complained about the food. Instead, they thanked me, helped clean up, and treated me like I actually belonged there. It was such a simple thing, but it meant more than any holiday I had ever spent at home. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed constantly in my pocket. Missed calls from my parents. Messages from my brother. I didn't read them that night. I already knew what they would say. Anger first, then blame. Maybe even a few attempts to make me feel guilty for ruining Christmas. But the truth was, Christmas had been ruined in that house long before I walked out the door. It had been ruined the moment they stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as someone whose only job was to serve them. Days passed before I finally read the messages. At first, they were angry. My dad demanded that I come home and apologize. My mom said I had embarrassed the family. My brother called me selfish, but slowly the tone began to change. The house was different without someone doing all the cooking and cleaning. The meals weren't ready on time anymore. The laundry piled up. The kitchen stayed messy. Eventually, a message arrived from my mom that simply said, "We didn't realize how much you did for this house." I stared at the screen for a long time before putting the phone down. For years, I had waited to hear something like that. An acknowledgement, a moment of understanding. But strangely, it didn't feel as satisfying as I once imagined. By then, something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I just understood my worth better than I used to. That Christmas didn't end with shouting or revenge. It ended quietly. I moved forward with my life, focusing on people who treated me with respect instead of expectation. And eventually, I realized something important. Walking away hadn't just been about dinner or chores. It had been about choosing myself for the first time. Because in the end, my parents didn't lose a meal that night. They lost the person who had been holding their home together all along. And once someone learns they deserve better, they rarely go back to being treated like less.